Good evening, everyone. This week's Parsha is Pinchas, Tavshin Pei. And today's learning, actually this week's learning, has been sponsored by Shrag and Nancy Green, in memory of Shrag's grandfather, Yeshua Aryeh Leib ben Shmuel Nachum, and by Mr. Eric Jordan. Okay. We're going to focus on the part of the Parsha that talks about Rosh Chodesh. The last part of the Parsha talks about sacrifices that are brought. It starts with the carbon tamid. It starts with the daily sacrifice that's brought twice a day, or the carbon tamid. It was a sacrifice on behalf of the entire Jewish people. And again, it was brought every day, once in the morning, once in the evening. And then the Torah continues discussing the carbon musaf, the additional sacrifices that are in addition to the daily sacrifices that are brought on Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and on the Chagim, on the holidays. So we're going to focus on Rosh Chodesh. And this is Perek Chavches, Pasuk in Aleph, chapter 28, verse 11. The Torah tells us, Rashei Chodshechem, and on the first of your months, Takrivu Oila Hashem, you shall bring a burnt offering to God, Parvaneva Karishnayim, 2 young bulls, Va'ayel Echad, 1 ram, Kavasa ben Eishara Shiva Tamimim, and 7 male lambs in their first year, unblemished. Ushloisha Esrainim Soiles, 3/10 of an ephah, that's a dry measure, an ephah is a dry measure, 3/10 of an ephah Soiles of flour, Mincha as a meal offering, Belula Bashemen, that is mixed with oil la parha echad, for every one of the cows. Ushnei Esrainim Soiles Mincha Belula Bashemen, and 2/10 of an ephah of flour as a meal offering mixed with oil la echad, for each ram. The Saraini Sarain, and 1/10 Soiles of flour, Mincha as a meal offering Belula Bashemen mixed with oil, for each one of the lambs. It's a burnt offering, a pleasant aroma as a burnt offering. It's Ola means it's a completely burnt offering. Satisfying aroma. Isha Hashem, an offering to God. V'niskehem, and their libations, their wine libations. Chatzi ahin, half a hin. A hin is a liquid measure. Chatzi ahin, a half a hin, yelapar, half a hin of wine for a cow, ushlish sahin lo ayil, a third of a hin for each ram, revius ahin la keves yayin, and a quarter of a hin of wine for a lamb. Zois aylat chodesh b'chadshay, this is the ola offering of a month in its month, l'chadshay hashana for the months of the year. Usiir izim echad l'chatas la'Hashem, and 1 male goat as a sin offering to God, al eilas hatamid yaseh v'niskai, alongside the daily ola offering, alongside the daily burnt offering, it shall be done v'niskai with its libation. So this is the carbon musaf. This is the additional sacrifice brought on Rosh Chodesh. So the first thought that I want to share with you comes from the Sefer HaChinuch. The Sefer HaChinuch is a book that records all the 613 mitzvahs, with much of its laws, and a reason, an explanation for each mitzvah. An explanation that we always stress is not a definitive explanation, but it's an explanation, or a lesson that the Torah wants us to take from it. So when discussing this mitzvah, that on Rosh Chodesh we bring a carbon musaf, we bring this additional sacrifice, the Sefer HaChinuch explains it in the following way. And I'm going to read to you from an English translation of the Sefer HaChinuch. From the roots of the commandment, meaning a reason for the commandment, what the commandment comes from, there is a need to preface that it is known to all wise-hearted men that the sphere of the sun, the sphere of the moon act with their power that is given over to them from the master of all the powers in this lowly world, great effects upon the bodies of people and upon all types of other animals. The sun and the moon have very strong effect on people's bodies and on animals, and even upon everything that grows in the earth. from the great cedars to the thin grasses, and more generally upon all that is from the four elements which are below them and under their governance. This is the preface. The sun and the moon have a very strong effect on everything in the world. Now, listen to this. This is very interesting. And it is famous among the masses, young and old, that the power of the moon is noticeable in everything that is done on earth, as it is known to those that cut whitish trees, as they do not cut them when the moon is new until 5 or more days. And those that ply the waters, they travel by water, also do not cast off till after 5 days of a new moon. And so too, all people are careful not to draw blood close to its renewal. Drawing blood here means what's called bloodletting, which was a very, very common practice a couple hundred years ago still. And everybody knows you don't let blood until close to the renewal, close to when the moon renews itself. And several other activities, big and small, require guarding not to do them when the moon is renewing. Right? There's certain things you wait for a couple of days when it renews, and there are certain things that you stay away from as the moon is renewing, to the point that they say that flax found in soaking or in the kettle to cook during the renewal of the moon becomes defective and will not be effective for anything afterwards. And the principle of these things is revealed and known to all, and discussing them at length would be childish. So we're not going to get exactly into how to explain any of this, but we understand his point. The point of the Sefer HaChinuch is to bring out that the moon has a very strong effect on everything that happens in the world. The moon has an effect let's read on. And so since the renewal of the moon brings novelty to the activity of man, and it is all according to the word of the omnipresent, blessed be he, and according to his decree, it is fitting for us also to bring novelty and sacrifice an additional sacrifice over the other days, to his name may be blessed, to arouse our souls and to fix in our hearts that all novelties that exist in the world are from him, from God, blessed be he, and all of the power of the spheres are only found with God alone. So the moon, says the Sefer HaChinuch, brings novelty to our lives. It brings new things. It allows us to do things that we wouldn't do before. It has different effects on our bodies. It has effects on things, how they grow. It has effect on things, whether we should do them, whether we shouldn't do them, how to do them, when to do them. But it's very interesting how the way this is described is it brings novelty. It brings newness. That's what happens when the moon rejuvenates itself, when the new moon appears, or as the moon is developing. It brings novelty. It brings newness into our lives. There are things that we wouldn't, there are things that happen to us, things in our bodies that change, things that change in animal bodies, things that change in the world, things that are renewed because of the moon, even things that we would refrain from doing until a certain point when the moon renews itself, because of the fact that it brings, like he says, novelty. It brings something new to our lives. So therefore, we should do something new also. We should do something novel that we don't do every other day. Every other day we have the daily sacrifice, and now we're going to do something novel. We're going to do something new. We're going to do something different. We're going to now bring an additional sacrifice. The moon brings novelty to our lives, and now we're going to do something novel corresponding to that. But the point of the novel thing that we do corresponding to that, says the Sefer HaChinuch, is to bring a sacrifice to God so that we recognize that all novelty that happens as nature does not come from any of the natural bodies in nature. It all comes from Hashem. Hashem does it through the moon. The moon is the means by which Hashem does it. But the point of this extra sacrifice, this additional sacrifice, is to remember that all the novelty, the additions, the changes, the renewal that the moon brings to our lives, to our physical lives, that we should never forget, it's not the moon. It's all coming from Hashem. And how do we remind ourselves that? How do we internalize that? By bringing a sacrifice to Him. By bringing an additional sacrifice. By doing something novel, corresponds to the novelty of the moon. But we do it as a gift to Hashem, as a recognition to Hashem. What we are trying to do that at this point of the month is to remember that the novelty of the moon is not the novelty of the moon. It's the novelty of Hashem, because all powers of nature come from Hashem. There are no independent powers. Everything comes from Him. And the Sefer Chinuch concludes, and with its pure and true thought, our souls will rise, and the blessing of God, may He be blessed, will rest upon our heads. So that's a very interesting insight from the Sefer Chinuch about what Rosh Chodesh is about. Rosh Chodesh is about recognizing that the novelty, the renewal that comes to the world through the moon is a novelty that comes from Hashem, and never to forget that. Now, according to the Sefer Chinuch, why is so much focus on the moon than on the sun? I'm not sure. But this is his thought about Rosh Chodesh. Okay, now I want to share with you what the commentary of the Sefornu says in this week's Parsha about Rosh Chodesh. And the Sefornu is actually coming to, he starts his thoughts answering a question. He doesn't ask the question, but it's clear from his comment what his question is. Actually, he does mention it, I'm sorry. And his question is like this. When we start discussing Rosh Chodesh, the Torah says, "Uvarashei Chodshechem," and on your first of the month, and on the first of your months. Now, this day is called Rosh Chodesh, the first of the month, and refer to it as the first of your months. When we then continue, let's say, talk about Pesach, we don't refer to it as your Pesach. And we talk about Shavuos, we don't talk about it on the day of your Bikurim. Shavuos is called Yom HaBikurim, the day of the Bikurim. We don't say on the day of your Bikurim. We don't say on the day of your Sukkos. Why by the month do we talk about it in a possessive form of the Jewish people? So the Sefornu says, because the Torah is coming to allude to the following. Hina yomer shachodesh hayaminig liYisrael sheyayim kodesh b'tzad ma sheheidu ba'amrei asher nistera sham b'yayim ha'maiseh v'zayerbesh shehaya yayim rosh chodesh etziyam yayim maiseh. It's clear from a certain source in Tanakh that Rosh Chodesh was celebrated by the Jewish people as a mini holiday. It was a day that they refrained from work or they refrained from their regular activity. That is a practice of the Jewish people. The Torah never mandates it. It's a practice the Jewish people have always practiced. Before Rosh Chodesh Torah talks about Shabbos, and afterwards it talks about Shavuos and Sukkos. It doesn't say on the day of your Shabbos. It doesn't make it possessive. And so the Sefornu is saying the reason why by Rosh Chodesh it does it, because the Torah is alluding to this practice of the Jewish people. It's not mandating it, but it's alluding to it. It's alluding to the practice of the Jewish people of how it's our Rosh Chodesh, meaning we made it into a holiday of sorts. We made it into a day that we treat like a holiday, that we refrain from our regular activities on it. The Sefornu continues, the Tamen Hagam Zeh Haya, and the reason for this practice is, Ki Amna Matzlachas Yisrael B'Olam Hazeh, the Jewish people's success in this world, Hi B'Tzad Ma'adoime Le'inyan Hayareach. It is similar to the moon. Our lot, the Jewish people's lot in life in this world, is similar to the moon. Le'inyan hayareach asher ein lo ba'atzmo or klal, that it doesn't have its own light. Zulasim asher tekabel mezulasa. The light of the moon only gives off light when it receives light from something else, meaning from the sun. And this is how the Jewish people are. The Jewish people, as the Sefornu is going to say, don't have their own light, but rather they're dependent on another light. V'zeh she'afa pi shekaydim lo egel hayacharis ala lichos chayris v'shibad malchias lo'ilam. When the first of the 10 commandments, when the first tablets were given to us before the sin of the golden calf, the Torah describes that the writing on the tablets was choris, which means it was engraved. But our sages in Avos, in Pirkei Avos, say, don't read it as choris, but as cheres, freedom. There is freedom on the tablets. By receiving the Torah, the Jewish people became free. Free from what? Free from what the Sephardim calls shibud malchias. That means to be subjugated to other nations. We would have always been a completely sovereign nation. That was an eternal freedom that we should have had or should have kept after receiving the Torah, but was lost at the Chet HaEgel. And once the Jewish people sinned, the Jewish people did not, on a consistent basis, have their own crown of monarchy, their own sovereignty, like other nations. They had it at periods of time, according to the flow of the highest, most light upon them. Without it, they go in the darkness, and there is no light for them. As what happens to the moon, when it's not able to receive the light of the sun. There is no mazel for the Jewish people, which could translate as there is no angel that is designated to give influence to the Jewish people, like by other nations. They don't have any light on their own. So only the light of Hashem, the Yosem L'Ratzain, when they are deserving of it. So the Sephardim is telling us a fascinating idea. The Jewish people are like the moon in that when they are doing Hashem's will, then they have the light of God that shines upon them. And that manifests itself in the idea of being a sovereign people. And that was something they should have had forever, if not for the sin of the golden calf. With the sin of the golden calf, they now had basically put themselves in a state where, like the moon, they can have no light. They have no direction unless they get their light directly from God, which they have to be worthy of. Other nations of the world have a mazel. They have an angel. Hashem has basically set up an angel for them. This angel is, of course, an angel of God. It's all the power through the power of God. But basically, the existence and the life and what kind of a life other nations have goes through this angel. The Jewish people don't have that. They depend directly on the light that comes from God. And when they're worthy of it, then they have the light. Without being worthy, they don't have the light. Other nations are not as worthy the Jewish people, but they still have their freedom. True, in history, kingdoms and countries and empires and nations come and go. But the Jewish people have always been the ones that have always been the most irregular. And they've been the most irregular because of the fact that once they became dependent to be able to have their own direction and to be able to have their own lives and direct their own lives and have their lives enlightened, which comes when you're able to be sovereign and live your own life as your own nation. That is something that they have to get directly from God and have to be worthy of it. Other nations don't work that same way. They have their own set of, they have their own, I don't want to say their source of light, of course, is God, but the source of light works differently for them. For them, it works on a more consistent basis because it's going through the angel. But for us, the Jewish people, it comes directly from God. And therefore, if that light is gone, if we're not worthy of that light, we're in darkness. And that darkness manifests itself in gullus, in exile, and all the trials and tribulations of exile. And just as the moon is in the dark without the light of the sun, we're in the dark without the light that comes directly from God. And that darkness is the darkness of exile. So this is the way in which we resemble the moon. And then the Sephorah talks about how we find different places in which Hashem is called our light. Because the point is that our ability to live with light and not live in darkness and confusion and not having any direction, which again means to be subjugated to the nations of the world because we're in Gauls, because we're in exile, that can only come from the fact that we get that light directly from Hashem. Okay. Now, so this is how the Sephorah explains that we, the Jewish people, are similar to the moon. But there is another aspect of when we don't receive Hashem's light and we're in darkness. So besides for the problems that we face because of that, there's a certain way that this affects Hashem. When we're in the dark, there is no question that now creates a desecration of Hashem's name. What this means is that the nations of the world recognize our unique relationship with God. So when we suffer and we're in the dark, what do they say? They say, hey, look at the nation, look at the people of God, look what happens to them. That's a desecration of God's name. So when we're in the darkness, there's an effect on Hashem's honor in this world. Now we know that, as we read, on Rosh Chodesh says a seir izim lachatas, chatas lashem. There is a goat that's brought as a sin offering. If it's brought as a sin offering, it means it's an atonement for us. What's it an atonement for? It's an atonement, says Sephorah, for the fact that we create the darkness or we diminish the light that should be coming to us. So that sin offering that we bring on Rosh Chodesh is meant to be an atonement for us. And if it's meant to be an atonement for us, that means it's meant to bring back some of that light to us. Now, where do we find? Now, there he elaborates. The Torah calls it a chatas, a sin offering. And actually, the way the sin offering is explained, we find it in our Musaf prayers. As our sages instituted when they put in the prayers, Hashem, you have given us sirei chatas, goats of a sin offering, lachaper ba'adam, to atone for them. Zikaron l'cholam yiyu, it should be remembrance for all of them. Teshuas nafshem miyatzayne, a salvation of their lives from the hands of the enemies. So it's very clear that this atonement that comes on Rosh Chodesh is an atonement that comes for the purpose of saving us from our enemies. Saving us from enemies means bringing back some of that light that we have diminished. Now, with that atonement for us, that also is a salvation, so to speak, to the desecration of Hashem's name. The desecration comes when we're in the dark, which we brought upon ourselves. But that brings about a desecration of Hashem's name. And if the sin offering that we bring on Rosh Chodesh, as we say in the Musaf prayer, is a way for us is an atonement to be saved from our enemies, then that means that we now have also, with that atonement, made up to some degree for the desecration of Hashem's name. Lefikach Omru, Shalakach Demar Basir Reish Chodesh Chatos LaHashem, B'bnei Shekaparasai Ma'ila L'Kiddush Yisbarach. This is why, when the Torah talks about the Sir Izim, when it talks about this male goat for a chatas, it calls it Usir Izim Erkad L'Chatas LaHashem. One he-goat as a sin offering to Hashem. You know, this male goat as a sin offering is also mentioned by the other sacrifices. So, for instance, by Pesach, it also says Usir Chatas Echad, and one goat as a sin offering, L'chaper Aleichem, to atone for you. Doesn't say Chatas LaHashem. The only time it says chatas laHashem, a sin offering to God, is here by Rosh Chodesh. Why does it say that? The answer is because think of the words. It's a chatas laHashem. It's a sin offering for God. For God means that this sin offering is for God. Not that God needs atonement, but it's for God. There's a certain benefit to God from it because it now makes up for the desecration of God's name. That's what lies in these words, chatas laHashem. And this is what our sages mean in the Gemara in Chulin. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem said, Haviu kapara alai, bring an atonement to me, al shemi'at because I diminished the moon. V'tzon Eloimar, Haviu kapara b'shvili la'asi kiddush shmi ha'mechula b'goyim, b'sibas ma shemi'at v'yaseirech shegleises Yisrael b'starti panay mehem. Hashem says, bring a kapara, bring an atonement, so to speak, for me. Not that Hashem did anything wrong, but it means by the fact that I have minimized the light of the moon, I have minimized the light of the Jewish people that are like the moon. And because of that, that has brought about a desecration of my name. This sin offering is going to atone for that. It's going to make up for that. So the Sefornu here, as again, a fascinating concept, fascinating idea from the Sefornu about how Rosh Chodesh is about, or at least a sin offering brought to Rosh Chodesh is about, the fact that we are similar to the moon. And because we are similar to the moon, so let's backtrack for a second. The Sefornu began talking about the fact that Rosh Chodesh is a mini holiday that was established by the Jewish people themselves. And it began saying, what's the reason for that practice? Because we're like the moon. We're like the moon in the sense that the moon is in darkness unless it receives light from the sun. And when the sun is blocked from it, it's in the darkness. We're also like the moon. We don't have our own light. We don't have, so to speak, a consistent light. Our light has to come directly from Hashem. And to get that light directly from Hashem, we have to be worthy. That light means that we are able to be a sovereign people, being able to lead our lives as Jews who live by the Torah, serving God without any kind of disturbance and subjugation from the nations of the world. And the light, when we talk about that we receive a light from God, that means that kind of sovereignty. And when we don't have that light, we're in darkness. We're in darkness. We're subject to all the trials and tribulations that come about from the nations that we're subjugated to them. And Rosh Chodesh, when we bring the Sirach Chatas, when we bring the sin offering, that is, as we say in the Musa prayer, a salvation from our enemies, then that means that with Rosh Chodesh, we atone for the diminishing of the light from Hashem that we have caused, which again manifests itself in being subject to the nations of the world, and that is atoned for, in the sense that we're saved from the nations of the world. So if that's what Rosh Chodesh does, then it's a reason to celebrate. Another aspect of the celebration of Rosh Chodesh is the fact that if we are saved from our enemies on Rosh Chodesh, then that makes up for the desecration of Hashem's name that comes about when we're in the darkness. When we are in darkness, caused by the fact that we diminish that light from Hashem that we need and that we need in order to be sovereign and live the lives that we want to, even though we've diminished it through actions, that sacrifice atones. If it atones, then the desecration of Hashem's name that comes about when we are in darkness, because the nation of the world recognize we are Hashem's people, but if we suffer, they say, look what's with Hashem's people. Then when that happens, that's the desecration of Hashem's name. If Rosh Chodesh takes us out of that, then that brings back the honor to Hashem's name. That's also part of the celebration of Rosh Chodesh. And that is why the Torah, when it talks about the sin offering, calls it a chatas laHashem, a sin offering for Hashem. Hashem benefits from it also. The atonement that comes about from the sin offering makes up for the desecration of Hashem's name. Because if we are taken at whatever degree out of the darkness of the gullus, we're safe from our enemies, some of the light has come back, then that brings back the honor to Hashem's name. And that is why it's called a chatas v'Hashem. It's an offering to God or for God, because the atonement that we attain brings back honor to Hashem's name. So this is another fascinating idea what Rosh Chodesh is about. Rosh Chodesh is about the atonement for us. It's first of all a time for us to look and realize that we are like the moon, that we have no standing or light without a direct light from Hashem they have to be worthy of. And without that light, we're in darkness. We're plunged into the darkness of gullus, of exile. And Rosh Chodesh is the time to get out of that darkness and to be safe from our enemies and to bring back honor to Hashem's name. And that is another very fascinating idea and concept to think about regarding Rosh Chodesh and when Rosh Chodesh comes. So we have these two very interesting concepts from the Sefer HaChinuch and from the Seforim about Rosh Chodesh. And perhaps this would be something that will help us next Rosh Chodesh, which is a difficult month. This Thursday, Shavas B'Tammuz, commemorating the breaching of the walls of Yerushalayim. 3 weeks, then comes Tisha B'Av, when we commemorate the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And Rosh Chodesh Av ushers in the 9 days, which again, our mourning for the Beis HaMikdash intensifies. We're getting closer to the time of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. But it's a time, Rosh Chodesh is still Rosh Chodesh, and hopefully next Rosh Chodesh we'll be able to use these lessons to think about what Rosh Chodesh is about. But Rosh Chodesh reminds us that all the powers of nature all come from God. And it reminds us that we are like the moon, that our light comes only from God. Our ability to be free and to live as Jews, living with the Torah as we can, as we should, without difficulties and without tsaros, that we all have from the darkness of gullus. Rosh Chodesh has the power to lift us out of that and to bring honor to Hashem's name, and that we should pray that we should be lifted out of that darkness of gullus, and that the Tisha B'Av that's approaching should be the last Tisha B'Av, and that we should return to Hashem's full light with the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, B'meira v'yameinu, Amen. Have a wonderful evening.